Courthouse files in Cumberland County, North Carolina, hold a story that local officials worked hard to hide for more than a century. Between 1832 and 1839, 7 young women from the same rural community disappeared without a trace, all of them connected by a chilling detail. They had each given birth shortly before vanishing. What investigators uncovered in the spring of 1839 shook the foundations of respectable society and revealed a network of lies so tangled that historians still debate whether the entire truth was ever exposed. At the center was the case of Mercy and Charity Goodwin, twin sisters, whose tragedy would unmask not just one man's dark obsession, but a wider web of corruption stretching from simple farmhouses to the most powerful families in the state. By 1839, Cumberland County was thriving, built on tobacco fields and a steady flow of merchants traveling between Fayetteville and the western frontier. In this place, family names carried weight. A man's promise was as good as law, and young women of means could hope to marry well if they had beauty and virtue. Mercy and Charity Goodwin had both in abundance. At 22, the identical twins were admired county-wide, their copper-colored hair catching the sun, their moss-green eyes striking their features so symmetrical, strangers often stopped mid-conversation just to stare. They had been raised with every advantage as daughters of respected landowners, but privilege offered little defense against tragedy. When yellow fever tore through the county in 1837, both parents were taken within a week. Debts carefully hidden behind the family's polished reputation surfaced with brutal speed. The tobacco farm, the fine house with its carved porch railings, even their mother's jewelry, all sold off to creditors who showed no mercy. By the winter of 1838, the sisters were forced into a cramped boarding room above Hensley's general store, living off the small wages Charity earned teaching farm children. Mercy, frailer in health, could not secure respectable work. It was a harsh reminder that beauty and breeding meant little for women without money or male protection. Then came Jeremiah Whitlow, a man who seemed heaven-sent in their time of need. Wealthy, well-connected, and attentive Whitlow was a 38-year-old merchant whose company had made him one of the county's most successful men. He traded in tobacco, cotton, and the booming railroad economy. And though not traditionally handsome, his sharp features, lean frame, and piercing pale eyes unsettled some. He carried himself with charm, self-deprecation, and a promise of security the sisters desperately needed. Jeremiah Whitlow might not have been handsome, but he carried himself like a man born to be obeyed. He dressed with precision, spoke in the polished tones of a gentleman educated abroad, and carried the kind of confidence that only money could buy. For the Goodwin sisters, still reeling from the loss of their parents and the collapse of their fortunes, the most important thing was that he seemed to truly care. Unlike most men of his standing, Whitlow not only acknowledged their struggles, but made their survival his personal concern. His pursuit, however, was both relentless and strange. He appeared at the boarding house bearing extravagant gifts that no grieving teacher and her fragile sister could ever hope to afford: fine silks, imported perfumes that cost more than a farmhand's yearly wage rings, that glimmered with real stones. Yet with every visit, it became more apparent that he wasn't choosing between them. He showered both with equal intensity, praising their beauty as though it were a holy vision. "You are perfection made flesh," he once told them, his pale eyes darting from one face to the other, memorizing every feature. The sisters blushed at his devotion, but beneath the flattery was something unsettling. He spoke not to them as women with minds and hearts, but as flawless objects destined for display. When Whitlow proposed marriage in the spring of 1839, his offer carried a request that should have set alarm bells ringing. "I cannot choose between such identical perfection," he announced, gripping both their hands. "Providence has given me wealth enough for two. Mercy will be my wife before God and the law, and Charity will be my wife before my heart. We will live as one family bound not by convention, but by devotion." The idea was shocking, but not entirely impossible. In rural communities where survival often outweighed propriety, it wasn't unusual for a wife's unmarried sister to remain in the household. Whitlow promised that Charity would want for nothing, treated as though she were a wife in all but name. For two women who had lost everything, it felt less like scandal and more like salvation. The promise of stability, the chance to remain together, and the grandeur of Whitlow's estate, known as Rosemont, was more than they had dared to hope. They accepted, blind to the danger. Neither sister noticed the strange collection of miniature portraits in Whitlow's study, each depicting a young woman with auburn hair and familiar features. Neither wondered why a man of his fortune had never taken a wife. And neither imagined they had just stepped into the same trap that had already claimed 7 others before them. On a humid June morning in 1839, with only a minister and 2 witnesses present, Whitlow married Mercy in a ceremony so brief it felt perfunctory. He spoke his vows not to her eyes, but to some distant point, as though addressing someone unseen. Soon after, the sisters were installed at Rosemont, a mansion that looked like it belonged on a stage rather than a farm. The house rose in stately grandeur, with tall columns, sweeping staircases, and rooms dressed in European finery, mahogany, polished to a mirror's sheen. Persian rugs, soft as velvet chandeliers, scattering fragments of light across silk-covered walls. Yet for all its splendor, it was a house without a soul. There were no family portraits, no mementos of a life lived, nothing personal at all. Even Whitlow's bedroom was unnervingly bare, furnished with only what was necessary, as though the man himself was merely passing through. The household was run by Mrs. Donovan, an elderly housekeeper with a brogue so thick the sisters often struggled to follow her words, and assisted by 2 timid young maids who flinched at sudden noises and spoke only in whispers. At Rosemont, life seemed gilded on the surface, yet it quickly grew suffocating. The sisters soon noticed the quiet figure of Samuel the groundskeeper, who lived in a cottage by the stables and spoke mostly through nods and gestures. Mrs. Donovan explained that all of Whitlow's staff had been hired within the last 2 years, replacing others who had supposedly left for better opportunities, though the abruptness of their departures raised unspoken questions. In the early months, Whitlow played the part of a devoted husband, though his affection felt rehearsed, as though he were imitating intimacy rather than feeling it. He watched the sisters constantly, his pale eyes following their smallest movements as if they were rare birds on display. "You must remain perfect," he reminded them again and again. Posture, complexion, manners, nothing was left to chance. He even brought in a French governess to polish their already fine education, and a seamstress from Charleston to dress them in silks carefully chosen to flatter their coloring. Their daily lives became an endless performance: morning walks at the same hour, scheduled periods of rest, nightly baths in imported milk and honey. What began as indulgence soon revealed itself as control, a cage lined with luxury. By autumn, both sisters were with child, but instead of joy, Whitlow's reaction brought dread. He became consumed with their pregnancies, hovering at every examination conducted by Dr. Harrison Fletcher, a jittery man whose hands trembled as he adjusted his spectacles. "The bloodline must be perfect," Whitlow insisted with chilling emphasis. "Any flaw cannot be tolerated." Fletcher always nodded, his nervous smile betraying more than his words. As the months passed, unease grew. Mercy discovered a locked third-floor room dismissed by Mrs. Donovan as mere storage. Charity stumbled upon blood-caked tools in the carriage house. Samuel muttered something about livestock, though Rosemont kept no animals but horses. Nights were haunted by terrible dreams. Infants crying from inside the walls, muffled voices of women begging for help beneath the floors. Both sisters would wake at the same time, reaching across the darkness to cling to each other. "It's only nerves," Mercy would whisper, though her own voice shook. Yes, Charity would agree, her grip too tight to hide her fear. The house itself seemed to betray them. Conversations echoed strangely, as if there were hidden spaces behind the walls. Shadows lingered where no one stood. It became clear that Whitlow's fixation wasn't love. It was something colder, something that demanded control, obedience, perfection at any cost. Then came December, heavy with child. Charity wandered into the library one evening and leaned against a bookcase in search of distraction. To her shock, the shelves gave way. A hidden panel opened, revealing a narrow stairwell leading into darkness. Against every instinct, she lit a candle and descended. Beneath the mansion, carved into the red clay, lay a secret cellar. There, lined on shelves like a hunter's grisly trophies, were the belongings of women who should have been alive, but had vanished instead. A cream silk wedding gown, still carrying the faint scent of lavender. A pair of silver brushes marked with the initials MC. A journal filled with delicate handwriting, its entries cut short in mid-sentence. A music box that when wound played a fragile, haunting tune, while a tiny figure spun in a dress identical to the one folded above it. Item after item told a life erased, and Charity, candle guttering in the damp air, counted 7 distinct collections before she saw the names scratched into the clay. Margaret Crawford, 1832. Sarah Henley, 1833. Rebecca Patterson, 1834. Anna Louise Mackenzie, 1835. Catherine Vaughan, 1836. Elelena Pierce, 1837. Helen Gardner, 1838. 7 women who had shared Jeremiah Whitlow's bed and vanished after giving birth. As that terrible truth settled over her, footsteps creaked above and his voice drifted down, soft and possessive, as always. "Charity, my perfect one, where have you wandered off to now?" The discovery folded Mercy and Charity into a new cold reality. That night, whispering beneath quilts and rubbing their swollen hands to keep from trembling, they agreed they had to go now before Whitlow learned what Charity had found. Morning light showed how impossible escape would be. Samuel was always near a silent shadow that appeared wherever they moved. Donovan suddenly hovered over every chore with feigned concern. Dr. Fletcher increased his visits until the house felt monitored at every hour, and Whitlow himself only tightened the invisible leash, reading poetry and talking nursery plans, while his pale eyes flicked between their faces like a man cataloging specimens. When they mentioned seeing friends in town, he smiled and insisted the roads were too dangerous for pregnant women and that only Rosemont could keep them and their children safe and perfect. So they became prisoners in silk, pretending the gilded life suited them, while they mapped the house, learned the staff's routines, and looked for small openings. Charity returned to the hidden cellar whenever she could, and read the journals and letters left with the belongings, piecing together patterns of devotion that curdled into obsession entries that began with gratitude for Whitlow's attention and ended with notes on strange examinations and talk of perfection, a physician who asked invasive questions, a calendar marked for a final visit. Margaret Crawford's journal was the clearest mirror. One passage read like a warning. Now Jeremiah's attention is almost too intense. He speaks always of the baby's perfection. The doctor asks about family health as if hunting for flaws. Charity memorized every stopped sentence, every sudden blank where a life was cut off, and Mercy held her hand until it stopped shaking. They had no illusions left. This was not madness or rumor. It was a methodical cruelty. And from that night forward, they planned not a desperate sprint, but a careful unweaving of the net that held them waiting for the smallest chance to slip away. Charity's discovery of Margaret Crawford's unfinished journal had already prepared her for the possibility of tragedy, but nothing could have braced her for the brutal truth that arrived in February. The signs had been there: Dr. Fletcher's heavy bag, Mrs. Donovan's midnight visitors, Samuel's constant watch over the roads. But the sisters had clung to the hope that if they stayed cautious, if they planned carefully, they might yet find a way out. That hope was ripped away when Mercy's labor began 3 weeks early on a bitter winter night. The room chosen for her confinement was no warm nursery, but a cold, whitewashed chamber in the east wing that resembled a clinic. Dr. Fletcher arrived with 2 silent assistants, whose faces neither sister recognized. Charity was forced into an adjoining room, left only to listen. She heard her sister's cries rise and fall, heard the clinical murmurs of men who treated birth as procedure rather than miracle, and then heard words that froze her blood. The specimen appears to be developing normally. The arrangements for transport are all prepared. Wilmington expects delivery within the week. Charity pressed her ear to the wall, every muscle in her body trembling as she realized what the words meant. This wasn't medicine. It was commerce. Mercy's child, alive and healthy, was being prepared for shipment like a piece of valuable cargo. And Mercy herself was not a patient to be saved, but an obstacle to be disposed of. Just before dawn, Mercy's cries ceased. In the silence that followed, Charity thought she heard her sister call her name one last time, desperate and fading. Then Dr. Fletcher emerged, Hand's red voice thick with rehearsed solemnity. The baby was stillborn, he said, eyes refusing to meet hers. Your sister passed peacefully only moments ago, but Charity knew it was a lie. Mercy had not passed peacefully, she had been silenced. And the baby was not stillborn, it was gone, taken into the hands of men who trafficked in flesh and blood under the cover of medicine and marriage. The following days passed in a blur of staged grief. Whitlow played the role of the heartbroken widower with chilling ease, organizing a funeral that drew sympathetic neighbors their condolences, disguising the fact that none of them truly knew the man behind Rosemont's gates. Charity stood beside him, her belly heavy with life, her grief real but her face carefully controlled. She knew that every word, every glance, every movement was being watched. She could not betray her knowledge, not yet, because now she understood the game. Rosemont was not her home, but a trap, and Whitlow was not her husband, but her captor. With Mercy gone, she was the next to face the final act of his obsession. And if she could not escape before her own labor began, her fate would be the same. The funeral was a performance, a stage-managed display of grief carved in stone. Mercy's coffin was lowered into the Rosemont Cemetery with solemn prayers and a granite marker etched with her name. But Charity could not be fooled. She had heard what no grieving widow should: footsteps, where there should be none, voices muffled beneath the floor, and most chilling of all, the soft wail of an infant echoing up from the cellar. Her sister's child was alive. And if the crying was real, then Mercy herself might be too. That possibility twisted the horror tighter. Death was not the end at Rosemont. Whitlow had devised something worse. Dr. Fletcher's visits grew colder, clinical, as though she were no longer a woman, but a specimen under study. The subject is responding well to stress, he reported one morning. His tone detached, his hands brisk and unfeeling. Whitlow only nodded, asking about arrangements, and Fletcher answered in chillingly practical terms. Charleston had a buyer lined up. Premium interest due to the twin genetics. A high price offered for her child, while Wilmington stood ready to receive the previous subject for long-term confinement. Mercy was alive, housed in some facility like cattle in a pen, while her baby had been sold to strangers in Virginia. The scope of the conspiracy staggered Charity. This wasn't a single man's cruelty, but a network polished and profitable trafficking in women and children through Charleston, Wilmington, Norfolk, and beyond. If she gave birth within Rosemont's walls, she and her child would vanish into the same machinery. Escape alone was no longer enough. She needed proof that would outlast her and expose Whitlow for what he was. So swollen with child and bracing against fear, she began a secret war inside the house. Night after night, she crept through the hidden passages, memorizing guard routines. Searching rooms Whitlow had never meant her to find. In his study, she uncovered a ledger, its neat handwriting masking monstrous transactions. Specimen MC delivered February 1832. Subject Wilmington product, Richmond payment, $800. Specimen SH delivered March 1833. Subject Charleston product, Savannah payment, $950. Specimen RP delivered January 1834. Subject Norfolk product, Baltimore payment, $100. Each entry was a life broken down into code. Specimen for the mothers, product for the children, payment for their worth. The figures rose year after year, proof of an enterprise growing more refined, more lucrative. Behind a false panel in Whitlow's desk, she found letters that stripped away even the pretense of ambiguity. Charleston wanted children for genteel adoption. Norfolk hinted at buyers whose purposes could not be named, but were easy to imagine. The latest letter froze her where she stood. Jeremiah, the Charleston buyer, has specifically requested twin stock if available. Premium payment of $2,000 for a matched pair in good condition. The Richmond contact has expressed interest in the breeding potential of identical genetics. Advised timeline for next delivery M. Her blood ran cold. H.M. herself, Charity Goodwin. She was no longer a wife or even a victim in waiting. She was inventory, and her unborn child was a prize worth killing for. Charity lay very still and let the house breathe around her. The hush broken only by muffled footsteps and low murmurs that skittered past her door. And when Fletcher and the two men paused just outside, she heard clear as ice. The plan: move her to the east chamber, induce labor. Now get the infant out before anyone in town asks too many questions. The stranger's voice was flat and dangerous. Fletcher's was shaking, and Whitlow's calm orders threaded them together like a noose. Her chest hammered, but she kept her eyes closed, counting heartbeats until the moment she knew she had to act, because waiting had become a risk she could no longer afford. When the door eased open, she feigned sleep while Fletcher slipped in with a lantern rope and the small pistol tucked in his coat. His hands trembled as he crossed the room, and for the briefest second she saw pleading in his face, the look of a man who'd been swallowed by his own cowardice and now wanted a way back. So when he mouthed the single word they'd agreed on earlier run, she understood he meant it as badly as he hoped for it to be true. Charity waited until the lantern's light wavered over Fletcher's shoulder, then kicked with all the strength she had left, sending the makeshift screen crashing and the lantern skittering. And in the scramble that followed, she snatched at the pistol where it had fallen. Fingers closing around cold metal and bellowed like a cornered animal, a sound that shocked even herself. The shot she fired wasn't meant to kill. It was meant to shatter the rehearsed calm of Rosemont, and the bang echoed through hallways and stairwells, drawing curses and shouts as Mrs. Donovan and Samuel rushed in, Whitlow's voice raw with fury. Fletcher lunged for the pistol, but Charity twisted, struck him with a heel to the ribs, and pushed past him into the corridor, clutching the camera and the ledger she had tucked into her apron. Every step a gamble as she threaded the hidden passages she'd memorized, slipping through a trap door that smelled of clay and old secrets while the household erupted behind her. She crawled through a tunnel, breath burning until the night air kissed her face, and she tumbled out among the rhododendron at the edge of the estate, the house's dark silhouette looming behind. For a moment she lay there, sobbing with relief and fear, then staggered toward the road, the ledger heavy against her ribs and the camera's flashless images burning in her mind, knowing that Whitlow's men would come and that every second counted, until at last the sound of hooves reached her. A solitary carriage rounding the bend, and she flagged it down with shaking hands, shouting the names from the ledger as if they were armor, hoping the stranger inside would believe a frantic, battered woman who carried proof that a respected man had been selling mothers and children like cargo. The carriage slowed. A lamp threw its circle of light on her face. Behind her, the night at Rosemont seemed to inhale, and Charity understood with a clarity born of terror that nothing would ever be the same. The door creaked open and the three men advanced, Whitlow with his physician's bag, Fletcher with his shaking hands, and the third man, tall and broad-shouldered, radiating the menace of a hired enforcer. Fletcher leaned close, voice low but urgent. "The sedative should take effect within minutes, but I want it noted. I'm acting under duress. This violates every principle of medical ethics." Whitlow's reply was as cold as polished steel. "Your principles are noted and irrelevant. Administer the injection." Charity's heart hammered, but she knew this was her only chance. In an instant, she abandoned her feigned sleep and sat upright, her voice ringing through the chamber with calculated urgency. "Dr. Fletcher, I'm in labor. The baby is coming right now." The words shattered their rhythm. Fletcher fumbled, dropping the syringe glass, splintering across the floor. Whitlow's mask of charm cracked into pure fury. The stranger's shifted hand dipping into his coat, ready to draw, but hesitated as Charity cried out again, clutching her belly with convincing desperation. Fletcher's instincts overrode his fear. He knelt, examined her quickly, and nodded. "The contractions are regular. It appears genuine. We may not need to induce." None of them realized Charity had been preparing this moment for hours, rehearsing false contractions until her timing was flawless. Now their well-oiled machine had been thrown into chaos, and then salvation flickered outside her window. Torchlights, several of them moving steadily along the main road toward Rosemont. Not neighbors, not travelers. A search party. Whitlow noticed it at the same instant. His face drained of color. How much time, he snapped. The stranger parted the curtain's jaw tight. "Half an hour, maybe less. Sheriff's men, 6, maybe 8. Someone's been talking." For the first time, Whitlow's confidence wavered. The empire he had built in silence was suddenly exposed to the light. But surrender wasn't in him. His voice snapped like a whip. "Prepare the emergency protocol. Fletcher, you have 15 minutes to complete the delivery. After that, we implement complete containment." Charity didn't need an explanation. Complete containment meant annihilation. Every secret buried, every witness silenced, herself, her child, even the staff who knew too much. In that moment, a soft voice rose from the doorway. Mrs. Donovan, her lined face streaked with tears, wrung her hands as if wringing her own conscience dry. "Mr. Whitlow, I can't do this anymore. That girl's barely more than a child herself. What you're planning, it's murder, plain and simple." Whitlow didn't even look at her. His tone was colder than ever. Your conscience is noted, Mrs. Donovan. But if you defy me, you'll join the subjects in Wilmington. The choice is yours." The old woman recoiled as if struck. In that instant, Charity understood the final crushing truth. Everyone in Rosemont was a prisoner. Some bound by greed, others by fear, all chained to Whitlow's cruelty. Whitlow's smooth words filled the chamber, but they rang hollow against the evidence pressing in from every direction. Sheriff Crawford's voice cut like a blade. "Save your lies for the Judge Whitlow. We've got sworn statements, ledgers, and witnesses. This house of yours is nothing but a slaughterhouse dressed in silk." The stranger by the window tensed fingers, brushing the grip of his pistol, but 6 barrels leveled on him froze him in place. With a muttered curse, he raised his hands and allowed the deputies to seize him. Dr. Fletcher sat hunched in defeat, his trembling finally overtaking him. "It's all true," he croaked. "The cellar, the journals, the women. He made me part of it." His confession was the crack that widened into collapse. Deputies surged forward, securing the room, while others swept through the mansion, their shouts echoing as they discovered hidden doors and locked chambers that concealed the truth of Rosemont's darkness. Whitlow, still standing at the foot of the bed, stared at Charity with those pale, furious eyes. "Do you really believe they can protect you?" He sneered, his voice low, but venomous. "I have friends in every port from Charleston to Norfolk. This little show of force changes nothing. My work will continue." Charity, blood still on her lip from his earlier strike, lifted her chin with defiance. "Not anymore," she said, her voice steady, though her body trembled with exhaustion. "Your victims have names: Jeremiah Whitlow, and now the world will know them." Sheriff Crawford motioned to the marshals. "Take him." In that instant, Whitlow lunged, wild fury overtaking the last of his composure. But a deputy's rifle butt caught him squarely in the ribs and drove him to the floor. Iron cuffs snapped shut around his wrists as he howled like a beast cornered at last. Mrs. Donovan clutched Charity's hand, tears streaming down her wrinkled cheeks. "It's over, child," she whispered. But Charity, staring past the open door toward the cellar she had seen with her own eyes, knew it wasn't over at all. Not until every woman still breathing in Whitlow's facility was found and freed. Not until every child stolen was traced and accounted for. As dawn broke over the rolling fields of Cumberland County, the once proud estate of Rosemont stood surrounded by lawmen. Its grand facade, columns, and chandeliers could no longer hide what had been wrought inside. Charity, weak from fear and the weight of her unborn child, felt both relief and dread in equal measure. Relief that Whitlow's reign of terror had finally ended, and dread at the knowledge that his crimes were part of something larger, darker, stretching far beyond the red clay foundations of Rosemont. Sheriff Crawford's words cut through Whitlow's polished veneer, and the word "survivors" struck Charity like lightning. Mercy. Others. They weren't all gone. Hope and horror collided in her chest as lawmen swarmed Rosemont, dismantling the empire of deceit piece by piece. Dr. Fletcher, trembling and broken, lifted his head from his hands. "I'll testify," he said, voice hoarse but steady. "Everything. The buyers, the safe houses, the women still alive. I can't carry it anymore." His confession cracked open the whole conspiracy. The next hours blurred together, part chaos, part deliverance. Rosemont's ornate halls became an active crime scene as federal marshals cataloged every ledge of evil. The coded ledgers, the bloodied tools, the false walls, and hidden chambers. Charity herself was rushed into care by a legitimate doctor from Fayetteville, her labor real now after the night's ordeal. While investigators pulled apart Whitlow's web, Charity brought new life into the world, her son a healthy child, who cried with a force that echoed through every corner of the hospital ward. For the first time in months, tears on her face were not only for grief, but for relief. The revelations spilled faster than anyone imagined. In Wilmington, following Fletcher's directions, marshals uncovered a warehouse that was nothing short of a breeding prison. 12 women kept in squalor, stripped of their identities, their bodies reduced to instruments of commerce. And among them, gaunt but alive, was Mercy Goodwin. When the sisters were reunited days later in Charity's hospital room, the moment defied language. Mercy's body shook as she clung to Charity's hands, both of them whispering through sobs that they had each been told the other was dead. The cruel lie had been Whitlow's most effective weapon, crushing hope before it could even spark resistance. As weeks passed, the scale of Whitlow's network came into stark focus. Fletcher's testimony revealed how meticulously the operation had been built. Falsified death certificates from corrupt officials, fabricated illnesses on parish records, forged ledgers at courthouses to erase whole families from existence. Buyers believed they were adopting orphans or taking in widows' children, never suspecting they were fueling a machine of abduction and despair. Whitlow had made himself untouchable through wealth and reputation, weaving a mask of refinement while profiting from human suffering on an industrial scale. Dozens of women each year vanished into his system, their names replaced by cold initials in his ledgers, their children sold as commodities. For Mercy and Charity, survival was both blessing and burden. They had endured what few could imagine, and though their bodies would heal the scars Whitlow left behind ran deeper than bone. Still, their survival ensured that the truth would never again be buried. The story of Rosemont was no longer whispered in secret. It was written into the record, carved into the conscience of North Carolina, a reminder of how darkness can wear the mask of gentility and how even in the face of cruelty, voices once silenced can rise again. Whitlow's downfall revealed not just one man's depravity, but the rot that had spread across a society willing to look the other way. His cruelty was systematic. His method of selection calculated orphans with no kin, widows left adrift, immigrants without local ties. He played the role of savior, offering shelter and stability, when in truth he was trapping women in a machine built on deception and profit. Once in his grasp, they were transformed from wives into property held in hidden facilities where they were bred broken and eventually erased when no longer of use. The trial that followed gripped North Carolina and the entire South. Courtrooms overflowed with citizens who wanted to see justice, while newspapers across the country carried lurid accounts of the Rosemont atrocities. Testimony revealed a vast web implicating judges, merchants, politicians, and wealthy planters across multiple states. Buyers who had taken infants under the guise of adoption were exposed and charged. Corrupt clerks and physicians who had forged records lost their offices and their freedom. The respectable veneer of Southern society cracked wide open. Dr. Fletcher, his conscience shattered, became the government's most important witness. His detailed accounts of the births, the secret transfers, and the coded ledgers gave prosecutors the evidence they needed. He was spared the gallows, but condemned to live with the knowledge that he had enabled Whitlow's crimes for years. Mrs. Donovan, once too frightened to speak, was hailed as a hero. Her courage in alerting her nephew at the courthouse had brought federal marshals down upon Rosemont, saving untold lives. The warehouse in Wilmington was the most horrifying discovery of all. Investigators found women who had endured years of forced pregnancies, their bodies used until broken, their spirits crushed by punishment and despair. Survivors described medical experiments, beatings, and starvation, designed to strip away resistance. Records found in the warehouse exposed an entire clientele of elite families and wealthy men whose names filled a social registry, proof that Whitlow's empire had been sustained by those who outwardly claimed refinement and respectability. As marshals spread their investigation, more facilities were uncovered in Charleston, Norfolk, and Savannah. The numbers were staggering. Authorities estimated hundreds of women and children had been trafficked in less than a decade, with Whitlow's operation profiting more than $50,000 a fortune in its day. On December 15, 1840, Jeremiah Whitlow was hanged before a crowd so large it spilled into the streets. He went to the scaffold, insisting he was misunderstood, calling himself a visionary of human improvement. No one listened. Among the thousands who came to watch were the families of his victims, and in the front stood Mercy and Charity Goodwin, bearing witness to the end of the man who had tried to destroy them. Their survival and testimony made them symbols of resistance. Newspapers printed their story nationwide, casting them as heroines who had faced unimaginable horror and lived to expose it. Charity named her newborn son Thomas, honoring Sheriff Crawford, and he grew up with his mother's story etched into his life. He later became a lawyer devoted to protecting women and children, fighting to ensure predators like Whitlow never again thrived in secrecy. Mercy, though forever scarred by captivity, found healing in the kindness of a Fayetteville minister she eventually married. She poured her strength into supporting other survivors and advocating reforms. Her daughter, stolen at birth and recovered in Virginia, was finally placed back in her arms, giving her a measure of peace. The story of Rosemont entered history as both a cautionary tale and a testament to courage. It exposed how darkness can hide behind wealth and gentility, and how the voices of women long silenced could break an empire of cruelty. For generations after the Goodwin sisters' ordeal was retold, in courtrooms, pulpits, and classrooms, a reminder that evil flourishes in secrecy. But truth, once spoken, has the power to tear it down. The Rosemont estate didn't survive its own infamy. After Whitlow's execution, the property was sold to provide restitution for victims and their families. The grand mansion, once a symbol of refinement, became a grim attraction that drew the curious and the morbid until local residents demanded its demolition. The land was parceled off to farmers, erasing the physical remains of Whitlow's empire, though its memory lingered long after the bricks were gone. Dr. Fletcher served 8 years in prison before being released under the condition he never practiced medicine again. He lived out his days as a small-town pharmacy clerk, broken by guilt and plagued by nightmares until his death in 1857. Mrs. Donovan, the housekeeper, whose courage lit the fuse, received a government reward and returned to Ireland, where she lived out her life in peace. Her nephew built a respected career, investigating crimes against women, inspired by the case that had changed both their lives. The broader investigation revealed the sheer scale of Whitlow's operation. More than 30 convictions spread across 5 states, implicating businessmen, officials, and families whose names once commanded respect. It forced federal authorities to confront the reality of human trafficking as an interstate crime, setting legal precedents and spurring reforms in how missing persons were tracked and how death records were verified. Investigators also began scrutinizing respectable businesses more carefully, recognizing that criminal enterprises often wore the mask of legitimacy. For the survivors, healing was uneven and lifelong. Many carried scars, physical and emotional, that never fully faded. Yet in their shared pain, they built networks of support, helping one another reclaim fragments of dignity and purpose. The case also gave fuel to reformers, who demanded stronger protections for women without family ties or financial means, recognizing that isolation had made them easy prey for men like Whitlow. Charity lived to see her son Thomas grow into a man of law, dedicating his life to protecting women and children. Mercy, though never free of the shadows of her captivity, found love with a Fayetteville minister and purpose in working with other survivors. Her daughter, recovered from Virginia Byers, grew up under her mother's fierce protection. When the sealed case records were finally opened in 1890, historians uncovered a chilling trove of testimonies, ledgers and official correspondence that offered one of the most detailed windows into the hidden crimes of antebellum America. The revelations shocked a new generation, but they also cemented Rosemont's legacy as a turning point. The lesson was clear. Even the most sophisticated networks of cruelty can be undone by ordinary people willing to risk everything for justice. Mrs. Donovan's courage, Fletcher's broken confession, and the Goodwin sisters' determination ensured that truth prevailed and countless lives were spared. And yet questions remain. Were all of Whitlow's facilities ever uncovered? Did every victim's story reach the light, or were some lost forever in the shadows of history? The answers may never be known. But what endures is the reminder that justice, though often delayed, is possible when enough voices refuse to remain silent.